Picture this: a chessboard where powerful players are moving pieces silently in the shadows. Now imagine that chessboard is West Africa, where coups have become as common as changing seasons. In this high-stakes game, one young captain has become both the most valuable piece and the most targeted. Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso. Then picture this: a midnight meeting in a neighbouring country, hushed voices discussing how to topple a government, messages intercepted between military officers and terrorist groups, and a plan to storm a presidential palace. This isn't fiction. This is the latest chapter in West Africa's political drama, where Burkina Faso has accused its neighbour, Ivory Coast, of harbouring coup plotters seeking to overthrow Captain Ibrahim Traore's government. But why does everyone seem to want Traore out? What's really happening behind the scenes in this power struggle? And how does Russia fit into this complex web of alliances shifting across the Sahel? Could this be the spark that ignites a regional conflict between former allies? To understand the plots to wipe out Traore, we need to look at the recent coups in West Africa that shook the whole world. West Africa has been experiencing what some call a coup belt, a wave of military takeovers that has reshaped the political landscape. Since 2020, we've witnessed successful coups in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Each one follows a similar pattern: frustration with corruption, worsening security, and leaders who've overstayed their welcome. In Mali, Colonel Assimi Goïta seized power in August 2020, promising to restore order to a country battling jihadist insurgencies. In Niger, General Abdourahmane Chiani overthrew the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum in July 2023. Each coup was met with international condemnation, but considerable domestic support. Captain Ibrahim Traore's path to power followed this same script. In September 2022, at just 34 years old, he overthrew Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, who himself had seized power only 8 months earlier. Traore, now the world's second youngest head of state at 37, promised to tackle the growing jihadist threat that has claimed thousands of lives and displaced nearly 2 million people. But unlike a typical power-hungry coup leader, Traore declined his presidential salary and kept his modest military rank of captain. This symbolic gesture resonated with citizens tired of corrupt officials enriching themselves while ordinary people suffered. Now let's turn to the latest drama. Last week, Burkina Faso's security minister, Mahamadou Sana, appeared on state television with a bombshell announcement. The government had foiled a major plot to overthrow Captain Traore. According to Sana, the plot was discovered when intelligence services intercepted communications between a high-ranking Burkinabe military officer and terrorist leaders. The plan allegedly involved current and former soldiers collaborating with terrorist groups to sow total chaos and place the country under international supervision. The most explosive claim: that this coup attempt was orchestrated from neighbouring Ivory Coast, with former officers Major Joanny Compaoré and Lieutenant Abdramani Barry named as key masterminds. Captain René David Ouedraogo was also implicated and is currently on the run. The plotters allegedly planned to storm the presidential palace on April 16th. They reportedly leaked sensitive military information to terrorist groups to escalate attacks on civilians and soldiers, hoping to incite revolt against Traore's government. In the days following this announcement, tension has gripped the capital, Ouagadougou. A scheduled meeting of army officers at the General Staff headquarters was postponed and then cancelled when the invited officers failed to show up. Military camps were placed under heightened security, with military vehicles stationed at the entrance of the General Babassi camp. Helicopters circled the presidential palace during a cabinet meeting, held under tight security. Perhaps most telling of the uncertain atmosphere, local media reported crowds flocking to the palace of the Mogonaba, a traditional authority in Burkina Faso. Among them were army personnel and families of missing civilians. This accusation didn't come out of nowhere. Relations between Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast have been deteriorating for months. But what is the Ivory Coast's involvement in the Burkina Faso coup attempt? Just days before the coup allegation, on April 19th, defence ministers from both countries held a meeting at their shared border, supposedly aimed at bringing about a new start in relations. But in an interview, Traore didn't sound optimistic about this diplomatic effort. Referring to Ivory Coast, he stated bluntly, "All the destabilisers are there and they aren't hiding." He added, "At some point we have to stop the hypocrisy and tell the truth. There's a problem with the authorities of this country." About his relationship with Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara, Traore revealed they initially had telephone conversations and Ouattara sent emissaries for discussions. "We were hoping things went ahead with common sense," Traore said, but added that the connection was now broken. These tensions didn't emerge overnight. Several incidents have strained relations between the neighbours. In late March, a Burkinabe soldier and a civilian official were arrested in northern Ivory Coast. Last September, 2 Ivorian police officers were arrested in Burkinabe territory at an illegal gold mining site. Negotiations are still ongoing regarding the release of citizens from both countries currently detained. Traore made an even more direct accusation in July 2024, claiming that a centre of operations to destabilise. Burkina Faso was located in Abidjan, Ivory Coast's economic hub. Bear in mind that the April 2025 incident is far from the first attempt to overthrow Traore. His government has faced numerous coup attempts during his 2.5 years in power, arguably the highest number of attempts to oust a president. In fact, we've lost count of the number of times they've tried to take this man out of the picture. But here's a few of those attempts to take Traore. Shortly after taking control, military prosecutors revealed in December 2022 that there had been an attempt to destabilise state institutions by civilians and Lieutenant Colonel Emmanuel Zungrana. In September 2023, nearly a year after Traore's rise to power, the government reported thwarting another proven coup attempt. By January 2024, Prime Minister Rimtalba Jean-Emmanuel Ouedraogo announced yet another foiled coup, describing it as an umpteenth attempt at destabilising the country. In September 2024, authorities disclosed they had prevented several attempts at destabilisation, claiming that former transitional President Damiba had led the military segment of this plot within Burkina Faso. Security Minister Sana has claimed that opposition forces, backed by Western intelligence agencies and European mercenaries, have orchestrated destabilisation plots from various countries, including Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Nigeria. This series of alleged coup attempts raises questions. Are these genuine threats or convenient narratives to justify crackdowns on opposition? And why does Traore seem to face so many challenges to his rule? I need you to do me a favour. If the complexity of this African power chess match has opened your eyes even slightly, don't just be a passive witness. Hit that subscribe button if you believe these hidden truths about Africa deserve to reach more people. Share this video with someone who still thinks they understand what's happening in the Sahel region. Because if we stay quiet, we're no better than those who stood by and watched history burn. We're no better than those African leaders, cowards who were silent while Thomas Sankara was taken out. Now, let's continue. To understand why Traore is being targeted, we need to examine his dramatic shift in Burkina Faso's international alignments. Since seizing power, Traore has positioned himself as a champion of anti-imperialism, with a particular focus on ending French influence in the region. In February 2023, just months after taking power, his government expelled hundreds of French troops from Burkina Faso, part of a larger trend across West Africa. Traore explained his reasoning by saying he wanted to look at other horizons because we want win-win partnerships. His prime minister suggested Russia would be a reasonable ally in fighting terrorism. This rejection of French influence spread quickly across the region. Mali and Niger's military governments also expelled French soldiers from their territories. France also completed its troop withdrawal from Chad in January, while Ivory Coast announced plans to withdraw French forces, and France is negotiating the withdrawal of troops from Senegal by year's end. These French military bases have long served as logistical hubs facilitating French military interventions across Africa, often under the guise of counter-terrorism operations. Their closure marks a significant diminishment of France's capacity to project power across the continent. French President Emmanuel Macron's response was telling. In January, he commented that African leaders had forgotten to say thank you to France for its assistance in combating Sahel insurgencies, a remark that reinforced perceptions of French paternalism. Perhaps Traore's most significant move has been forming the alliance of Sahel states with neighbouring Mali and Niger in 2023, which evolved into a confederation in July 2024. This tripartite alliance represents a direct challenge to Western influence in the region. But what is this AES, and could it protect Traore? The AES has taken symbolic steps against colonialism, such as downgrading the French language and renaming colonial-era streets. But its ambitions go far beyond symbolism. The Confederation aims to pool resources for energy and communications infrastructure, establish a common market, implement a monetary union with a proposed currency, enable free movement of people, promote industrialization, and invest in agriculture, mining and energy. Its ultimate goal? To federalize into a single sovereign state. Economically, the outlook for AES countries appears promising, with Burkina Faso achieving 5.5%, Mali securing 3.8%, and Niger reaching an impressive 7.4% GDP growth last year. These resource-rich countries are renegotiating relationships with Western companies to assert greater control over their natural wealth. They're actively seeking new partnerships with Russia, Turkey, China, Iran and North Korea to fill the vacuum left by France's departure. Traore has emerged as the face of this alliance, positioning himself as one of Africa's most prominent advocates for a multipolar world order that challenges Western dominance. But how has Traore challenged Western dominance? Just days before the alleged coup attempt was announced, Traore's government granted a significant gold mining license to Nordgold, a Russian mining company. This move highlights the growing Russian influence in the region, which has alarmed Western powers. Following the expulsion of French forces, Burkina Faso, like its AES partners Mali and Niger, has turned to Russia for security assistance. Russian mercenary units have replaced French troops in operations against jihadist groups. Burkina Faso's untapped natural resources, including gold, zinc, copper, manganese and diamonds, represent significant economic potential. Gold is particularly important, with Traore's government nationalising mines and promoting domestic gold refining. This resource nationalism, combined with the pivot to Russia, puts Burkina Faso at odds with Western economic interests that have dominated the region for decades. The question becomes, could these economic and geopolitical realignments be motivating forces behind attempts to remove Traore from power? Despite Traore's promises to tackle the jihadist threat, Burkina Faso's security situation remains dire. The country recorded the world's highest terrorism death toll in 2023. Jihadist groups, some allied with Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, control roughly 40% of the country's territory. While Traore's supporters point to doubling of military spending, creation of a rapid support force, and increased use of drones and helicopters, critics argue that the security situation has worsened under his leadership. Some analysts suggest that the expulsion of French forces and realignment with Russia has not yet delivered the promised security improvements. This ongoing insecurity creates a volatile environment where coup attempts become more likely as military officers grow frustrated with the lack of progress against extremist groups. The accusation against Ivory Coast threatens to further destabilise an already fragile region. If tensions escalate between Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast, it could disrupt vital economic ties and potentially spark conflict between the neighbours. The situation also deepens the divide between the AES bloc and ECOWAS, which has struggled to respond effectively to the wave of coups. Ivory Coast remains an influential member of ECOWAS, while Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have turned their backs on the regional organisation. What happens next between Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso could reshape West Africa's political landscape for decades. We could see ECOWAS backing Ivory Coast in this diplomatic standoff. President Alassane Ouattara has maintained strong ties with Western powers and remains one of ECOWAS's most influential leaders. Unlike the AES countries, Ivory Coast has kept French military presence and Western economic partnerships intact. If ECOWAS throws its weight behind Ivory Coast, we could witness the formalisation of two competing blocs in West Africa, the Western-aligned ECOWAS countries versus the Russia-aligned alliance of Sahel states. This division wouldn't just be ideological, it could manifest in economic sanctions, border closures, and potentially even military posturing. Remember that ECOWAS threatened military intervention against Niger after its 2023 coup, only backing down when Mali and Burkina Faso promised to defend their neighbour. The regional body has already imposed harsh sanctions on all three AES countries, which has only pushed them closer together and toward Russia. This tension becomes a proxy conflict between global powers. With Burkina Faso embracing Russian support and Ivory Coast maintaining ties with France and the United States, local disagreements could become theatres for great power competition. We've seen this pattern throughout Africa's post-colonial history. Local conflicts amplified and exploited by external powers pursuing their own interests. Western nations, alarmed by Russia's growing footprint in the Sahel, might increase military and economic support to Ivory Coast and other ECOWAS members to counter Russian influence. Meanwhile, Russia could deepen its security partnerships with the AES countries, potentially expanding arms sales and deploying more military contractors. For ordinary citizens, the greatest concern remains security and economic stability. Despite Burkina Faso's GDP growth from $3.2 billion in 1990 to $18.3 billion in 2023, and some reduction in extreme poverty, daily life remains precarious for many. Captain Ibrahim Traore's government faces significant challenges both internally and externally. The repeated allegations of coup attempts suggest either persistent opposition to his rule or strategic use of security threats to consolidate power, perhaps both. The accusation against Ivory Coast represents a dangerous escalation in regional tensions that could have far-reaching consequences. It comes at a time when the geopolitical chessboard of West Africa is being dramatically rearranged, with Russia gaining influence as France retreats. Traore has positioned himself as a champion of African sovereignty and a critic of Western influence, resonating with many citizens tired of foreign interference. His decision to decline a presidential salary while maintaining his military captain earnings and his focus on nationalising resources have earned him popular support. However, the persistent insecurity and economic challenges raise questions about whether his anti-Western pivot will ultimately deliver the promised benefits to ordinary citizens. As this situation continues to unfold, we'll be monitoring developments closely. How will Ivory Coast respond to these serious allegations? Will the security situation in Burkina Faso improve or deteriorate? And will the alliance of Sahel states succeed in its ambitious vision for regional integration? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain. West Africa remains a critical region to watch as global powers compete for influence, and local leaders assert their independence. This isn't just a story about Traore accusing Ivory Coast of harbouring coup plotters. It's about something far deeper. It's about Africa's ongoing struggle to define its own future without foreign interference. It's about a young captain refusing to follow the same neo-colonial playbook that has kept the continent dependent for decades. When we talk about Burkina Faso standing up to its larger neighbour and Western powers, we're witnessing another chapter in the long fight for true African independence. The alliance of Sahel states represents something powerful. African nations deciding their own destiny, controlling their own resources, and choosing their own allies. If you felt anything watching this, whether it was anger at continued foreign meddling, hope for a truly sovereign Africa, or maybe even a spark of inspiration at seeing leaders challenge the global order, don't let that feeling disappear. Subscribe to the new Tourist Channel right now. Because this isn't the last story about Africa's fight for self-determination that we're telling. Like this video, so the algorithms don't bury a narrative that challenges Western media's portrayal of African affairs. A story the world needs to hear. Share it with your family, your friends, and your group chats. Be the reason someone else learns what's really happening in West Africa, beyond the simplified headlines about coups and instability. And if you want to go even deeper, if you want behind-the-scenes analysis, early access to our investigations, exclusive discussions about Africa's changing geopolitical landscape, join our membership community. Because the New Tourist isn't just a channel anymore, it's a movement, and it's only just beginning.